alcohol and fuel tax freezes, as well as a shock abolishment of the non-dom status, were all revealed in Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's spring budget this afternoon. In a boisterous address to the Commons, the Chancellor also confirmed the rumoured cut to national insurance tax.
Because we have asked those with the broadest shoulders to pay a bit more, today I go further. From April the 6th, employee national insurance will be cut by another 2p from 10% to 8%. And self-employed national insurance will be cut from 8% to 6%. It means an additional £450 a year for the average employee, or £350 for someone self-employed.
We're very pleased to be joined now by the very man, Tory peer and former Chancellor Norman Lamont, who occupied number 11 Downing Street from 1990 until 1993. Thanks for joining us, Norman. I'm going to be honest with you. There are four of us sitting here in the studio. We're not exactly thrilled by this budget. It doesn't seem to be that exciting. A reduction in the national insurance, prefaced by the Chancellor saying it's particularly unfair to tax people two times, once on their income and once with national insurance, and then proceeds to carry on with this particularly unfair system, plus the abolishment of the non-dom tax relief, which doesn't seem very conservative, and of course harsher conditions for second home owners, which seems to attack aspirational people. But perhaps you have a more optimistic view of Mr. Hunt's budget. Your thoughts?
Well, I do have a more optimistic, very considerably so. I think you've got to remember that the Chancellor had very little headroom, much less than he had expected. And so I think delivering the 2p national insurance cut, which will actually mean £450 more for an average person. If there are two in a household, it would be £900. And when you take account of the previous 2p cut, that's very significant, twice that, 900 and 1800. So I think it was the best he could really do in very difficult circumstances. As regards getting rid of the non-dom status, I know that may seem to people a little odd, but that is something that actually is unique to this country. Nigel Lawson always wanted to abolish it. He thought it was quite anomalous, and Jeremy Hunt has said that he will do that accompanied by transitional measures and other measures which will ensure this country will still be attractive to overseas people to come and live here. And I think actually that was the right thing to do. I think it was important to show the way forward by reducing national insurance. It just isn't realistic to think you could have had much bigger tax cuts, given the amount of debt we have, which is now going to start coming down. I think he did well in the circumstances. It was a very difficult environment.
If I may, I would suggest that the elephant in the room here might be the record levels of immigration this country has seen lately. We know that there's a £25 billion black hole in public services as a result of this rapidly growing population. So, in effect, we're spending £150 less per person when it comes to things such as the NHS. £6 billion more to the NHS, OK, that's great. But if we were to do calculations on quite how much the level of migration is costing our public services, that figure is very quickly swallowed up. He said that we cannot live anymore on this level of migration, but yet again has not actually pointed out what he's going to do about it.
Well, I don't think you expect the Chancellor of the Exchequer in a budget to announce new measures on immigration. That would be not possible, not the right thing to do. I thought it was interesting, as you've just said, that he mentioned immigration so often and not being the answer to our problems. And if the implication of your question is that actually we need to reduce immigration, I totally agree with that. But that is not a suitable subject to come up in this budget. It's a wider question and have to be tackled elsewhere.
Well, you say that, but I would suggest that it is the Treasurer's responsibility to be paying what could rise to up to £11 billion a year to house migrants and so on and so forth. We've recently learned the Department for Work and Pensions is no longer going to publish who is receiving welfare and quite how that splits between those who are born outside of this country and those who are working here. It seems to me that the government are trying to sweep this under the carpet when in fact it's the biggest cost to our economy right now.
Well, I'm not sure it's the biggest cost to our economy. I mean, the only point you make that I think is fair is that the Treasury has to fund the bills of looking after immigrants who arrive here illegally. Sorry, we're being drowned out by helicopter noise here. But I don't think you can. I don't think you can realistically expect new measures on immigration to be announced in a budget speech. There are lots of other things, and I think, you know, what was announced on national insurance is significant. I think the measures to get more people into work were significant, and the fact that the UK outlook on growth is actually quite good compared to other countries, and that the IMF are backing this. I think this was a budget that looked forward to some good times, better times ahead. We've been through an immensely difficult period, and people just underestimate that. The crises that we've had, not just COVID, the war in Ukraine, the increase in energy prices, these have created a very difficult climate for a Chancellor of the Exchequer, and we're coming out of that now. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We've weathered the storm. I think the Chancellor deserves a lot of credit for a very skillful budget today, would be my view, very different from your own.
Totally accept, Norman, that these are very difficult conditions, and Jeremy Hunt did his best under the circumstances. But the fact remains, you know, we have our highest tax rates for 70 years. That the Tories, Rishi.
Yeah, can I just say about the highest tax burden for 70 years? COVID cost the economy £500 billion. That is equivalent to 15% of GDP. 15%. If your indebtedness, this all has to be paid for, goes up by 15%, it's hardly surprising that after such a cataclysmic event, the burden of tax has gone up by 2 or 3%. That is very unsurprising and inevitable.
I'm accepting that, Norman. I accept that. That's what I'm saying. But nevertheless,
yeah, but you can't.
No, but nevertheless, despite these difficult.
You can't just.
I know this, but despite, I mean, I accept everything you say. We've been through very difficult times. Some might argue that the furlough scheme went on rather too long. However, 70 years, highest tax rate, 14 tax rises over the past few years under the Tories. The fact of the matter is we expect better of the Tories. We expect lower taxes. So has Jeremy Hunt, I'm going to ask a positive question now, has he laid the groundwork for tax reductions in the future?
Yes, I think he has laid the ground for that. But you were saying nevertheless, while rejecting everything I just said. You can't reject everything I've just said. The situation is either difficult or it isn't difficult, and it is difficult. And the overhang of the COVID crisis, the war in Ukraine, is still with us. But we are coming out of this. We are weathering the storm. And I think to get the 2p cut was the best that could possibly have been done in these circumstances. I'll tell you what I thought was the interesting point in the budget, though, was some critics of the government have said that these increases, these reductions in taxation are only achieved at the cost of starving the public sector of extra money. But Jeremy Hunt very skillfully pointed out that he was not going to put more money into the NHS on an unconditional basis, that it had to be put 3.4 billion in exchange for productivity increases. Now, I think this is a very significant change and a major step forward, giving the NHS money, but on the condition that it actually improves its performance. And he indicated that it would lead to, I think did he say, 100,000 more operations a year. I thought this was a very good way of answering the critics of the government.
What I would say in response, Norman, is this overhang, as you called it, from COVID, from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is in part down to government policy. It was the government's response to COVID that we are now paying for. I'm certainly paying a lot for it. Paying the privilege of being locked up for 3 years. That was fantastic. And also paying the privilege of having rubbishy energy policy for decades. So at least I should potentially take some heart in the fact we're going to lead the way in SMR technology. That is something in this budget that I think is a positive move at last.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you want me to say to that. Not many people complained the government was doing too much at the time of COVID. But, you know, I don't think there's a lot of point in banging on about, well, some people may have complained, but not very many. Most people thought the government did the right thing in having the furlough scheme and the other measures to support industry.
Norman, thank you very much.
I'm going to have to go in a second.
No, I was just going to say thank you for sparring with us. Excellent to talk to you.
Also, I just want to quickly throw to Isabel, whose face was a picture during some of those replies.
That was Lord Norman.
I just think voters are getting so tired of hearing the government complain about headwinds, this phrase that is wheeled out every time they talk about anything that they failed on in the economy. And secondly, people get very, very tired of them endlessly banging on about how much COVID costs.
Therefore,
it is not COVID that cost a huge amount of billions. It is their response to COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Well, likewise, Russia's invasion of Ukraine hasn't cost them. It's the fact that we don't have a sensible energy policy for the past however many decades.
Well, Rishi Sunak, let's have a furlough scheme. Let's have a furlough scheme
Let's
to bail
keep it
people
going forever.
out. And let's keep it going forever. Oh, look, there's been some response to that.
There's another word as well that none of us have a clue what they're about. Headroom. Let's have some more headroom. What headroom on what? I mean, and all the definitions you get of this seem to vary quite significantly. So, as ever, this is here to confuse. It has not actually laid out some clear, simple principles.
And I actually take umbrage with Norman Lamont saying that immigration's got nothing to do with this budget, when actually immigration seems to be the thing costing the UK taxpayer the most at the moment, and they constantly talk about the things they're going to do about it. OK, he's not Home Secretary, but I wish that we at least had a little bit of honesty of quite how much it's costing us. I mean, that would have been music to my ears.
Think about one thing. You said we were talking about interest rates, right, and inflation. Well, inflation has had nothing to do with what the government's been doing at all. You know, and inflation is actually an international issue.
Yeah,
it was not caused by the consumers buying too much in this country. That was diametrically the opposite problem. We put up interest rates for the wrong reason. So we should never have done that in the first place. We could actually now be cutting interest rates quite significantly. Inflation was caused by supply chains. And so get used to that. And it's come down because of that. It's got nothing to do with what the government's done.
He's a good guy, Lamont. It was good of him to come on and spar with us. But it's no good politicians saying,
it's really
hard times, because people will not buy it. They won't vote for you on that basis. So thank you, Norman, but good night.
Yeah, Isabel, you're going to...
Well, what I was going to say is he talked about how little wiggle room the Chancellor had, but nothing that was highlighted by the Chancellor was about substantially cutting public spending, which is one way he could actually increase his wiggle room. I mean, people probably don't realise that public sector spending has gone up 200 billion a year over and above inflation since 2019. That is gargantuan. And for the Chancellor to stand there today and talk about how the state needs to get smaller, having presided over this absolute ballooning in the size of the state, I think is utterly hypocritical and relies on people not knowing the truth.
I certainly can't.
Well, indeed.
How many noughts is that?
I have no idea.
I don't know.